Hey ladies and gentlemen, this is Miss Humbert here. I'm going to be doing the second part of your Unit 5 Notes 3. So we're going to be talking about basically the applications of the quadratic formula. So we're just going to do two quick problems here. So the first one's talking about the power tower, and it's modeled by parabolic motion. So it gives us a function, h is equal to negative 16t squared plus 80t plus 60, where h is the height in feet and t is the time in seconds. That will help us later when we get to our labeling of our answer. So it asks us how many seconds it takes the riders to drop from 60 to 0 feet. Well, if we're starting at 60 and we're going to 0, all I have to do is plug in 0 for my h. So I have negative 16 t squared plus 80t plus 60. So now what I'm going to do is I can go ahead and I can actually plug this into the quadratic formula. So my a is equal to negative 16, my b is equal to 80, and my c is equal to 60. So now I'm going to plug this into the quadratic formula. So my t is equal to the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2, that should be 80, there we go, times a. So let's go ahead and we're going to simplify that out. So the first thing we want to do is simplify underneath the radical. You're not going to actually type the square root in. You're just going to type what's underneath the radical. So in my calculator, I'm doing 80 squared minus 4 times negative 16 times 60. Do that in your calculator. Make sure you're getting the right answer. You should have gotten 10,240 underneath the radical, and all of that's being divided by negative 32. Now here's the deal. Okay, 10,240 is not a perfect square. So I'm, instead of taking the square root, going to immediately go into doing my two parts. So I'm going to do negative 80 plus the square root of 10,240. I'm going to start with that. You're going to type that in and then hit enter in your calculator. You're going to take what you have there and divide it by negative 32. When you do that, you end up getting negative 0.66. Again, check your rounding. So to me, I'm looking at this, I'm thinking, okay, it doesn't really make sense that we would hit the ground after negative 0.6 seconds. So I'm going to throw that answer out and hope to goodness that my next answer is a positive one. So then we're going to do negative 32, and then, so now I'm going to type that in my calculator. So I'm going to do negative 80 minus the square root of 10,240, then hit enter, and then I'm going to take that answer and divide it by negative 32. So then I get 5.66 seconds. Okay, so that does work. So after about a little over 5.5 seconds, you're going to return back to the ground. So we're going to throw out negative time because negative time doesn't make sense. Let's take a look at this one. A stunt person is attached to a safety harness and drops from a height of 210 feet. So here's that 210 feet. Then they're going to jump off and they're going to go downwards. Okay, so that's the motion. And if you were to completely fill this out, you would have a parabola. So we can model that using parabolas. So to figure out when it gets to a certain height, we can use the quadratic formula. It asks us how many seconds it takes to drop from 210 to 30 feet. So we're just going to pretend that this right there is 30 feet. So we want to figure out what x is, or what our time is, t, at that point. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, okay, now my height isn't 0. My height is 30. So I have 30 is equal to negative 16 squared plus 210. Well, in order for us to use the quadratic formula, it has to be set equal to 0. So I'm going to subtract 30 from both sides, and I get 0 is equal to negative 16t squared. 210 minus 30 is 180. So now I'm going to go ahead and assign my a and b and c. So my a is equal to negative 16, b is equal to 0, and c is equal to 180. So now I can go ahead and plug that into the quadratic formula. So let's do that. So we get t is equal to opposite of b, which is just 0, plus or minus the square root of 0 squared minus 4 times a times c, all of that over 2 times a. So now, again, I want to simplify just underneath the square root. I'm not going to actually put the square root in, but I'm going to simplify underneath it. So I'm going to do 0 squared minus 4 times 16 times 180. And that gives me 11,520 underneath my radical. divided by negative 32. Well, negative 0 doesn't really mean anything. So really what I have is plus or minus the square root of 11,520 divided by negative 32. So now I just need to do a positive and a negative version of each one. So I'm going to do the positive square root of 11,520. So I'm going to type that into my calculator, hit enter, and then divide that by negative 32. Well, when I do that, I get negative 3.35. I don't want negative 10. That would make no sense. The jumper would have to be reverse jumping. So now I'm going to try 11,520 as a negative. So since it's negative, we're going to do that, hit enter, and divide it by a negative 32. Well, I'm hoping this is positive because I have two negatives being divided. Well, when I divide it out, I end up getting 3.35. Good, that's positive. So then I notice that my t is being labeled in seconds. So it takes them 3.35 seconds to drop to 30 feet. So that concludes the second part of your note video, so you should be ready to do your applications on your note or on your practice sheet. Thanks for listening.